All right, so RAW versus JPEG. Now, I remember being in your shoes, got a new camera. It finally has an option to go RAW or JPEG, and I'm like, I have no idea what either of these really do, what it means, which one's better, what should I use all the time, and it can be overwhelming. So I'm here to help, let you see, the good reasons for RAW, the good reasons for JPEG, the bad reasons for RAW, the bad reasons for JPEG, and it's a decision that ultimately you're going to have to make. Hopefully this information helps you. Because I still shoot both RAW and JPEG at different times depending on the different scenarios. So again, don't stress out about it because 90% of the time it's probably not going to matter. Not a highly popular opinion probably, but that's the truth. All right, so let's look at the positives for RAW. So that is the better editing capability. So the RAW file tends to capture more data, more information, which gives you more to work with when you're editing. So, that's just helpful to have. Also, white balance. So you don't have to get your white balance perfectly correct before you take the photo because in RAW, again, it takes so much information in, you can actually set the white balance after you take the photo. You should still always try to get white balance as close as you can before, just so you can tell what you're looking at, see if you like it. But helpful to have to be able to adjust that after the fact. And also in low light situations, RAW tends to be a little bit better, again, because it's capturing a little bit more information, and you can decide the amount of noise reduction, things like that you want to do, where if you're doing a JPEG, it may already have done some of those calculations for you. Now, some of the negatives for RAW, and that is one with the editing, which is positive. You also need software that can edit RAW images. Not all the free software, or you can't just take it straight out of the camera and necessarily put it into your phone. Sometimes you can. Nowadays, probably easier than back in the day. But again, you just need a little bit more editing. The image actually won't look as good straight out of the camera most times because it's not edited. It's letting you decide everything you want to do to the image. And the file sizes are a lot bigger. I know they're about 4 times as big shooting RAW than shooting JPEG. So again, that's one thing that I take into consideration when I'm choosing to shoot RAW or JPEG. So one more thing with RAW is that it can fill up buffers more quickly than JPEG because of the bigger file sizes. Most cameras nowadays won't have an issue doing that, but if you're using an older camera or you're buying something used, this may be an issue. If you're shooting 10 frames in a row, once you get to 6 or 7 of RAW, it actually might start going more slowly taking the pictures because the camera's trying to save all those images and the file size is too big, and so it has to buffer and you take pictures more slowly. So that's one more thing to consider. Not that big of a deal, especially nowadays with all these great newer cameras. All right, so now for JPEGs, which is going to be a little bit of a switcheroo from the positives and negatives from the RAW, but let's take a look. So JPEG positives is file size. It's going to be much smaller. Again, my JPEG size is about 4 times smaller than the RAW file, meaning I can fit 4 times as many photos on a 32 gig card. I think I can do like 1,000 versus 4,000, right? So a lot more photos can be taken with JPEGs. And it's sort of pre-edited. So in your camera, you have a menu. You can select your picture style. That will apply to your JPEGs. So actually straight out of camera, they'll have a little bit of contrast and maybe a little saturation, whatever you're deciding, maybe sharpness, already bumped up a little bit. So they'll kind of look a little bit better straight out of camera, which means you may or may not want to do some editing software. I still recommend that you edit your photos, especially cropping. But if you don't want to, you just want to send them off right away, JPEG is a great option. All right, now for the JPEG negatives. So white balance. The white balance is already set into the image. It's already applied onto the image. It's sort of edited. You can tweak it afterwards, but it's just not going to look as good as if it was shot with RAW when you're changing the white balance after the fact. So there's less room for editing. So again, with the RAW file, it's collecting a lot of data, a lot of information. With the JPEG, your camera already sort of applies a filter over top of it. It already edits it a little bit. So you don't have as much wiggle room if you're overexposing or underexposing images. If it's a really harsh sunlight day and you want to up the shadows a lot, it might be a little bit better to shoot RAW, but you're still going to be able to edit the images. Okay, and if you're shooting at night, there's more potential noise in your JPEG images Now, I know some people that like to shoot JPEG because they like to have the camera apply noise filters and things like that in camera before you actually edit the images, because they feel that their images look a little bit better editing that way through the camera first than using a software after the fact. Now, again, that's another personal preference thing. You can try shooting JPEG, try shooting RAW, do your edits, see which types of images you actually like more, but that's one potential drawback to shooting JPEG. Now, again, most of the time, it's not really going to make a difference whether you're shooting RAW or JPEG, because where you see the biggest differences is at the extreme. So if it's really dark out, again, you're shooting high ISOs, that will maybe set apart RAW and JPEG. Because for me, when it gets really dark, I'll switch to RAW a lot of the time just to get a little bit more information and a little bit more editing capability. And you'll also see this when you're shooting and maybe you accidentally forget to change your exposure and it's really bright or it's really dark and you want to recover those shadows or you want to recover the highlights back to something that looks a little bit more of a normal photo. It's going to be much easier to do with RAW because, again, it's collecting more information. It's not already applying some edits to the image. So again, in those situations, if you find that you shoot a lot of times where you're shooting really underexposed or really overexposed, RAW is probably going to be a better decision for you. All right, so when I typically shoot JPEGs is during an Ultimate Frisbee tournament where I'm shooting 4,000 to 5,000 images a day. It just helps me know that I'm not really going to have to switch memory cards during the day. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to worry about it. I know I'm going to have plenty of space when I'm shooting JPEG. And also, again, like, it's a lot of images. I edit them really quickly. I'm not doing any like sort of deep edits where I'm really trying to work the image a lot. I'm going through pretty quick and just cycling through the images. So I don't need to apply a lot of edits. I don't need a lot of that extra information that a RAW file would provide. So just go to JPEG, workflow a lot easier, space is not an issue, and it just works really well for me. And for similar reasons, when I'm shooting professional sports for USA Today, I shoot JPEG because it's a smaller file size, it's quicker to upload, I'm downsizing the files anyway afterwards, and I'm not applying very much editing to the images at all, and all I'm really doing is doing a little crop, a little bit of toning, and sending the image off really quick. So the speed is much more valuable to me than the information in a RAW file. So I shoot JPEG in those situations. All right, so I shoot RAW when shooting portraits and events, and sometimes with single games for schools or communications departments, because I might apply heavier edits to those. I don't work on such tight of a deadline as I do with the editorial stuff. So I have a lot more leeway to, with portraits, make sure that the white balance is perfect after the fact. And I have plenty of space on my cards because I'm not taking 4,000 images in the day. It may be a couple hundred or maybe 1,000. So I'll have plenty of space to still put all the images on one card. So that's when I'm shooting RAW. And actually sometimes if I'm shooting RAW, I'll even back up with a JPEG. So I'll shoot both at the same time. So I'll just save the RAW files from my selects, the ones that I edit and deliver, and then I'll save all of the JPEGs from the entire event or the entire portrait session onto my hard drives, just in case there's something they want later and I'm not using up a ton of data on my external hard drives. So again, this is your choice. This is just some information for you to use to decide when you want to use RAW, when you want to use JPEG. One is not vastly superior to the other. Just use the information, decide on your own, do some testing out. And again, I've forgotten to shoot on RAW when I'm shooting weddings for my wife, and I feel terrible, and I switch it, but she still delivers amazing images with the JPEGs, and it all works out. So it's not that big of a deal as everyone makes it out to be. So hope that helps. See you next time.